Thank you, everybody. I'm Alisa, and I use she, her pronouns, and I work at Grow Food Northampton in Northampton, just down the road. And we are a food and land justice organization. You guys are kind of guinea pigs because I'm just starting to kind of try and formulate this concept of food and land justice as potentially as a public health issue, and really trying to use the tools of public health to figure out better ways to create a just local food system, a just food system, a just land system. And it's not a perfect fit, and public health is not the perfect vehicle. And I want to say that up front as a kind of, in full disclosure, I'm not completely even sold on this idea that I'm conveying to you, but I am interested in kind of conversation. And if any of what we talk about resonates with you and makes sense to you, I do think I come from a long background of public health, and I worked mostly in interpersonal violence prevention historically. So it's kind of a weird transition for me to bring this to the food and land justice sector. So again, it's not a perfect fit, but we're going to play around with it a little bit. So,
Alisa?
Yes.
Before you go further, would it be helpful for the folks on Zoom to just unmute for a moment to introduce themselves? Yeah, you have a.
Yeah. How many people do we have?
There's about 10 of us here.
Sure. Go for it.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'll go first. My name is Jen Salonetti, she, her pronouns. I'm calling in from the unceded land of the Mohican people in the so-called Berkshires of Western Mass. And I am from Woven Roots Farm and Education Center. Dale, would you like to go?
I'm Dale. I live in Northampton, and I'm also involved with the Farming, Forests, and Food Systems group of Climate Action Now.
Hi, Dale.
Hi, Lenore.
Anyone on Zoom can pop in. That might be quickest.
I'll go. I'm Malia. I'm not camera ready. I'm in Bend, Oregon, and I'm a student at Oregon State, interested in food justice. And yeah.
How about if I call on people? Maybe it'll move a little faster. Yeah, go ahead, Robert. Sorry.
That's okay. I'm Robert, he, him, and I work at Bramble Hill Farm in Amherst, Massachusetts.
Stephen?
Hello.
Betty?
Yes, I'm here, and I'm having trouble with my buttons. Betty Anderson Frederick, a gardener in Western Massachusetts, Wilbraham specifically, and I'm a member of NOFA Mass Board. And welcome. I'm glad to be here, and I want to hear your public health approach to this issue.
Thank you. Stephen, are you ready?
I'm here. So this is Stephen Sovic. I'm a beginning farmer and I live in Duxbury, Massachusetts. I look forward to the presentation.
Thank you. Malia, did we hear from you?
Yeah, I'm the one in Oregon.
Oh, yes, you are. Scott.
Hello, I'm Scott. I reside in central Vermont and am working at the Vermont Compost Company currently.
Sheila?
Hi, I'm Sheila Clinton and I live in Shelburne Falls. I returned from the Bay Area of California a year ago to Massachusetts. I'm very happy to be here at the NOFA conference, and thank you for this opportunity to learn from you and everyone else. It's really been great. Thank you.
Sabina? Okay, let's go to Michael, maybe. All right, if nobody else online is ready to present, maybe we'll move on. It's almost time for the workshop to end, so I'm not gonna worry. All right, so we're going to talk about a public health approach to this issue of food and land justice. What's interesting about public health, and that is different than kind of a pure medical approach, is that it really is population-based rather than individual-based. So it deals with problems that affect an entire population. You're looking for the benefits for the largest group of people possible in your public health approaches and solutions. Prevention, so primary prevention, and we'll talk about that shortly, is really at the core. So you're looking at resolving an issue before it actually happens. So what can you put in place before an issue takes hold? And it depends on collective action. One of the reasons that I love the field of public health, despite its shortcomings, is that it is very communal. It's very much based on the people who are most affected by the particular problem. And I'm sure you know the saying, nothing about us without us. It's kind of a tenet of some of the more radical public health folks, that no decisions are made, no actions are put into place, nothing can happen unless the people who are most affected by the public health issue are engaged and involved in the solution. I actually need to make my own screen. Okay, so I can see my own slides. So if we talk about a public health approach, the kind of traditional public health way of thinking about things is there are 4 major stages. You define the problem, you identify risk and protective factors, you develop and test your strategies, and then you roll them out. So first we have to define a problem. And we use these words, food justice, this concept of food justice, we talk about land justice, but it's can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I'm just wondering if we could spend like 2 minutes with people throwing out, just popcorn style, your understanding of one or both of these issues. So feel free to.
Everyone deserves to be fed.
Access to quality food.
Access to culturally relevant food.
Everybody has control over where they get their food and how they get their food.
Just wanted to voice one of the chats that popped up. Land justice is land back.
Land justice what?
Land justice
Land
is land
back.
back from Robert.
Thank you, Robert. Anything else about land justice? I heard more about kind of food justice, and not that they're not interwoven.
Access and durable tenure to the land.
Yeah, okay. These are all right along the lines of what we're going to be talking about. So let's first look at food justice in the United States, food injustice in the United States. 41 million people in the United States are food insecure. That's about 12%, and it's over 15 million households. But then when we boil it down and we look at the numbers in terms of race, we see that Indigenous households, almost 50%, it's between 45 and 50% of Indigenous households are experiencing food insecurity and injustice. Black households, 24%, Latinx households, 17%, and white households, 10%. So when we're talking about food injustice, we are talking primarily about people of color in this country, Indigenous people and people of color. So these are some of the definitions that I've kind of developed over time with a lot of input from a lot of different people. Communities exercising their right to grow, sell, and eat adequate amount of nutritious, fresh, affordable food. I heard all of that from you guys. The dismantling of all forms of oppression that act as a barrier for individuals, families, and communities to participate in a culturally relevant, somebody talked about that, healthy and ecologically sustainable food system, and that nutrient-dense food grown locally with care for the well-being of not just people, but the land, workers, animals, and all members of the community takes place. So let's look at land justice a little bit in the United States. So I'm sure that there is no one in this room who hasn't thought and talked lots about the injustices historically that have happened in this country regarding land. So we have historical theft, land dispossession of indigenous peoples. Black farmers have had land stolen. Other communities of color are deeply affected by lack of access to land. More than 60% of farm workers are people of color, yet people of color own less than 2% of all the farmland in the United States. So I have some, I don't know how much people know, and I don't want to make assumptions, but I think most of this stuff is fairly well known. It's really important to take it in just to set the tone of this conversation. We know that back in the beginning of the 1900s, 1 in 7 farmers in the United States were African American. They held titles to 19 million acres of farmland, but over the intervening century, 98% of Black farmers were dispossessed, and that was because of all kinds of discriminatory practices by the USDA, lending, farm programs that came out of the federal government. So today, 98% of rural land is owned by white people with less than 1% owned by Black people. So that's an enormous difference. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit about land loss, farmland loss generally. In Massachusetts in the last, that should be 60 years, I don't know how that showed up, we've lost almost 75% of farmland to, quote unquote, development. And that is echoed in many other states across the United States. The American Farmland Trust, if anyone has seen it, just a couple weeks ago came out with their kind of seminal report about land loss across the United States, farmland loss, and the numbers that they have are devastating. And they're essentially saying that if this trend continues at the rate that it has over the last century, I'm trying to remember the numbers. I'm not the best at numbers if I don't have them written down. I think across the United States, we're gonna lose something like 80% of farmland. So
I think there's a helpful infographic. It's like the area the size of the state of Alaska is expected to change hands in terms of agricultural land in the next 20 years.
Interesting. I would think it would actually be more than that, but that's interesting. Is that in the AFT report, or that's something else that you've seen?
I just did the calculation based on, I'll have to send you them.
Yeah, I'd be interested. Okay, so defining land justice. I feel like I'm reading a lot at you, but I hope it's useful. Land justice, this is from Black Women's Blueprint, a kind of working group of Black women's blueprint that works on land justice. And they say, land justice for us means justice for land as well as justice for the people. It means enabling people to have access to land and to be in mutuality with land, to restore the land, to care for the land, to heal the land, while allowing the land to facilitate our own healing and our own restoration. Embodying this level of mutual healing means there must be a return to the belief that we ourselves are not owners of the land, and we are not the center of the universe, but simply the custodians of future generations to come. And I'm going to talk about this towards the end, a little bit more of this concept of the way that it's talked about in the legal realm is that there's this new trend to give kind of personhood to land resources, water resources. There are countries in South and Central America that have already done this. It's kind of a new trend, and in the United States, it's meeting, as you can imagine, it's meeting a lot of pushback, which is really interesting in a country that has given personhood to corporations, but we don't give personhood to our natural resources. Some of the examples of land justice in action, somebody, who was that? Robert, I think, talked about land back, which is land restitution and reparations to indigenous peoples as a way of achieving land justice. There are all different kinds of community control mechanisms for land. One of them that's well known is agrarian commons, where there is a organization of all peoples involved in stewarding the land that actually owns the land, makes all the decisions about the land. And then I think you mentioned long-term secure access to land through leases. So those are just some of the ways in which land justice, we can get closer to some modicum of land justice. I'm wondering if anyone else has a model that they want to kind of throw out there, talk about, share, anything that you're involved in that is a land justice based model. Okay, we're going to keep going. It's going to come up more. So public health looks at something called risk factors. And the way that I think about risk factors is what are the structural and systemic inequities that create and perpetuate food or land justice? And there's a list here. I'm not going to read it to you. I'm reading a lot from the slides, but those are the kinds of really structural and systemic things in the United States that have led to food injustice and land injustice. I really appreciated when you said that it's not just access to food, it's access to quality food. I think it's, you know, when we as farmers are talking about nutrient dense food, food that's grown locally. So these are the structural pieces. So this is one of the places where I want to kind of point out the shortcoming of the public health framework to look at food and land access. It's supposedly this, you know, population-based approach, but it tends to look at the ways in which individuals and smaller units like families or small communities are creating the risk factors on their own, somehow assigning them the responsibility for the things that they're dealing with, the shortcomings that they have that have kind of put them into a situation of not being able to access food or access land. That's something that a lot of people, kind of the more radical folks who are working in public health, are really eschewing and really understand that that's not the case, that it really is structural, systemic inequities that are at the heart of most of our public health issues. And that's really important for us to think about when we talk about solutions, you know, when we think about prevention. The other thing that public health does is it identifies protective factors. What are the things that people, communities, systems can do to ensure that people have access to food and land? Again, public health tends to look at those individual factors. So they're kind of thinking about, oh, do they have a cultural heritage, you know, that they follow that values food, or things of that nature. So there, again, those are the shortcomings, but if you're creating a prevention plan and an approach to preventing something, protective factors is a huge piece of that. Yeah.
I'm curious if you would consider education as a protective factor, like if people have, you know, general, obviously not like the elite or people that go to the right schools, but like at the public health level, common public education, what food is healthy, what's not, like the nutrition essentials, is that considered protective factor?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, all of those things like cultural norms and access to education about an issue. I'm trying to think of some of the other, off the top of my head, I'm kind of like rushing here, like so I'm not going deep.
Food literacy?
Yeah, any of those kinds of things would be considered protective factors for sure, yes. And just to go a little deeper in that direction of your question, the ecological model is a model used by public health, and it looks at all these different realms that kind of feed into the risk and protective factors. So that would be individual, interpersonal, institutional factors, community factors, the public policy. So the structural pieces are all pieces that have either put people at risk or potentially offer protective factors to develop a prevention plan. So I'm actually curious, I just wanted to throw out the question to all of you. Do you think that in our kind of mainstream society, are we using protective factors as we address food and land security and justice as a society? Does that question make sense, people? I see, Lenore, you're saying no. Can you articulate anything about that?
Of the little bit that you've explained to me about what protective factors are, I mean, if nothing else, there isn't even a holistic understanding about how these things are connected to be able to have a strategic treatment plan, to be able to have an educational, rollout. There isn't even yet on a mass scale that kind of connecting of the dots. How personal, public, and planetary health are connected. How the soil health, it has to do with our gut health. How people's relationship to land, even on an energetic level, can calm their nervous system. That's not a known thing, even among some academics. So no, I don't think so.
Those are all good points. And to go back to the education piece, it's just in the last decade that there's even anything that is called kind of food education in schools. And it's if a community happens to have a nonprofit organization or a particular teacher or somebody that's kind of encouraged the school system to bring food education into the classroom. So it's of deep concern to me that we're not, as a society, we're not there yet. We're not at a point yet where we're understanding the importance of introducing these protective factors into schools for adults as well. Did you, I think,
yeah,
you had your hand up?
Yeah, I think that at the risk of sort of doubling down on the risks too, I think about even some of the ways that, for example, food education has gotten rolled out in public schooling in the last 20 years. And it's so deeply rooted in racism and individualism and colonialism and capitalism, right? Like when we look at so many of the ways that the science behind like things like the old food pyramid or even My Plate are developed, they're actually so shaped by agricultural lobbying that they're not actually rooted in bodies, communities, culture.
Absolutely.
So it's not as easy as saying we've just got to teach people what's healthy, right? Because that's not objective.
Thank you so much for saying that.
Shaped is
Yes.
really
And there's still so much
by corporate profit.
Yep, corporate profit, and there's still so much shaming about bodies and what we are taking in and all kinds of things that actually make people turn away from kind of food education because there's so much shame wrapped up in it. I mean, we're also living in this diet culture that kind of makes everyone uncomfortable around food. So that's a whole other topic that I wasn't going to get into, but I really appreciate that you brought in that piece that you just shared. I think I have to move a little bit faster. I don't actually have my, can anyone give me a time check?
8:34.
Okay, thank you very much. So I want to throw out to you another question. If we're talking about quote unquote prevention strategies according to our current societal zeitgeist around food and land justice, what are the things that this country does when people see food insecurity? What do we have in place right now from the government, for instance?
Social safety nets like SNAP, which is food stamps, or WIC.
Yep, exactly. What else? One of the main things that I think about is like the whole food bank, food pantry model, the model of giving food to people. In a lot of cases, it doesn't matter what the quality is. It's like getting food out to people so they're not hungry. So the thing that public health is really helpful with in terms of this question is all of that stuff is after the fact. So once people are already in a situation of food insecurity, not having enough to eat, not being able to access land to grow their own food, to farm, we throw these programs at them, as you said. So things like SNAP, HIP, WIC, food banks and food pantries, community meal sites, soup kitchens. Those are the ways in which we as a society know how to respond to a problem of public health, a systemic, structural public health problem. So I was going to ask you all these questions, like what are the limitations of these programs, but I already answered it for you, and I think it's fairly clear. The thing that always strikes me the most about this approach of after the fact is that we as a society love to take care of crisis. Like we are really good at knee-jerk responding to situations like, oh, there was a flood, let's send all this food down to wherever. But we're not good at building crisis resilience and doing the primary prevention pieces that allow people not to get to that situation in the first place of a lack of food, of the things that happen with massive climate destruction, all of the problems we have on farms now because of climate destruction. And I wanted to give an example from Grow Food Northampton, the organization that I work with, that when COVID hit, we launched a program. We had never done anything like this before, but we started delivering. We purchased food from 27 local farms in the Northampton area, and we started delivering it to all of the people who self-identified as food insecure in the Northampton area. And that program's still going on to this day. The budget of the organization in 2020, because of the pandemic, tripled because of private donations that came into the organization. People were so motivated by the crisis of the pandemic, the crisis of food insecurity. We have to do something, which is lovely and wonderful. And you want to, give people kudos and love them up for doing things like that. But it's kind of like, where have you been when we've been trying to create all of these systemic and structural changes all along? And sure enough, in 2021, we still had, because we were still doing this program, we continued to have more involvement in the organization, more money was coming into the organization that had previous to the pandemic. But now we're in 2022, and it's almost completely fallen off. People are like, pandemic's over, people are okay. People aren't okay. The numbers of people experiencing food insecurity are still through the roof. It went from like a 10-fold increase in food security to a 6-fold increase in the last 2.5 years. But that 6-fold increase from pre-pandemic is significant, but we don't have a 6-fold increase in interest in this program and funding. So it's just a very real example of how just something about the American mindset, that we love crises, but we don't put our attention and care and thinking into creating the structural changes that need to happen so crises don't happen. So let's talk about this concept of moving upstream. Have people heard that? Is it like coming out your ears because you've heard it so many times? It's actually, it comes from public health and people don't realize that. And I'm gonna play like a 1-minute video that kind of explains the upstream concept, just in case there are folks that haven't come across it. Okay, so I can't play the little video because something got messed up in the translation. But the story is, there are people on the bank of a river having a picnic. They see a person like floating downstream screaming, help me, I'm drowning. And they jump in and they pull this person out and they save this guy's life. And then they go back to their picnic, and 2 minutes later, another person comes down the stream saying, help me, I'm drowning. And they jump in again. And this happens over and over and over again. And they keep pulling people out of the river. And then one of them finally says, maybe instead of going into the river and pulling these people out once they're drowning, we should go up to the head of the stream and find out. In public health, historically, they always said, find out why they're falling in. I've always said, who's pushing them? What's pushing them in? Because it's not this like passive situation. It's like all those structural inequities and all of the systemic issues that we have in this country that are literally like pushing people into poverty and lack of access to food and land. So that's what the whole upstream concept is. Like, go upstream, figure out what the problem is. So this is a little chart that kind of illustrates that. In the public health world, we look at primary prevention, secondary prevention, and tertiary prevention. Primary is looking at what you can do to prevent food security before it becomes an issue, before it takes hold. Secondary and tertiary are both after the fact, and it's kind of mitigating the consequences, the short-term consequences and the long-term consequences. But what is most important to what I feel is important for us to talk about is the primary prevention piece. You know, what is it that we can do that actually addresses food insecurity and a lack of land access before it actually takes root? So the question being, what can primary prevention of food insecurity and injustice look like? So I want to give you a case study of the organization that I work for, and then I want to spend a little bit of time kind of pulling out, getting your kind of feelings and thoughts and impressions about, you know, what really is primary prevention and what we do. Ideally, I think any good public health intervention kind of addresses all of the different pieces. So it addresses primary prevention. It puts in place things that will, in fact, keep a problem from taking deep root and taking hold. But it will also, it's, you know, you don't do that to the exclusion of actually addressing people who are experiencing food insecurity right now or who don't have access to land right now. So you have to do a whole continuum of public health prevention and care in order to make sure that you're addressing the people already affected, you're keeping people from becoming affected by this problem, and that you're treating kind of the short-term and long-term consequences for people who have, in fact, are dealing with the problem. So Grow Food Northampton is a small organization. We're 11 staff. Andrea, who sits here, is a former staff person and one of the farmers on the Grow Food Northampton community farm. We own and steward a 121-acre organic farm. I'll get into what more details about that. Our mission is to provide access to land and nutrient-dense local food, to steward productive and sustainably managed farmland, mobilizing people to exchange knowledge about gardening, farming, and food, and dismantling oppressive systems and structures in the food system. So we essentially have three core components of how we do our work, and they are land access, food access, and community education. So this is just a little map and a little aerial view of the community farm that we own and steward. Our land access programming is about leasing land, providing no-cost and low-cost leases for land to small farms, beginning farms. We also prioritize finding farmers who are from communities who have been historically or currently have been harmed by or marginalized by the conventional food system. So that is an absolute priority, excuse me, for who we offer leases to. We also have a 333 plot organic community gardens so that community members can actually grow food for themselves. And then these other things are kind of the gravy, the kind of icing on the cake. We have lots of edible fruit and nut trees for community foraging, a pollinator habitat, a medicine garden. We're now doing research, collaborative research with one researcher, but we hope to expand, who is looking at agricultural practices that really reduce carbon emissions. He is, maybe you could talk about this, Andrew, you know what Piyush is doing in the field with his intercropping?
Yeah, he's growing pawpaw and perennial wheat. He's developing perennial wheat and hypothesizes that the two will work well together, and he's just using this as a test site while we've been in this area, and I don't know how long that's going to be, but yeah, he's getting it all set up.
We have a 15-year agreement with him, actually, because he's planting perennial wheat crops, as Andrea said, that have much longer, of course, put down much deeper roots, longer roots, and will sequester way more carbon. So anyway, we're really trying to move more into kind of the research realm around climate resilience. Just some pretty pictures. So we have 10 farms right now on the community farm. They differ in size from like real micro farms like Andrea's to up to 40 acres. We have one farmer who has a 40-acre farm, and actually our anchor farm, Crimson and Clover, for those of you who live in the area, you might know about Crimson and Clover, is I think 60 acres. And that's the largest farm that we have. So here's Crimson and Clover, Lakeside Organics. Flowerwork Farm is a brand new farm that is integrating, working with people with disabilities on the farm to grow flowers and market flowers. 2 Cents Homegrown, that title, that name got cut off. That's Shania Flowers, if anybody knows Shania. Does anyone know Shania? She grows her own organic vegetables for sale in food apartheid neighborhoods in Springfield. Ross Farm is an interesting one. This guy was a farm laborer for 30 years and finally decided he wanted to create his own farm and grow his own vegetables and market them. So he is on the community farm now, and he leases 2 acres. Straw Hat Farm is Andrea. Do you want to talk about your farm at all? No. Or what brought you to it? No, okay, put you on the spot. We have a group of 20 Somali Bantu refugee families that are farming at Grow Food Northampton this year. This is their 2nd year. Hillross Homestead actually grazes chickens and goats on our community farm. It's just an aerial view of our, transitioning to the community garden. This is an aerial view of our community garden. And we like to think of this as land access for, a large number, over 400 people actually use our community garden. And we also, we have a sliding fee scale for people to self-identify or use according to their own discretion. If they need to have a free or very low-cost plot, they are welcome to do so. So just some pretty pictures from our community garden. So that was all our land access programming. We also have food access programming, and that includes our farmers markets. We have year-round farmers markets on a weekly basis, the Tuesday market and the Saturday market. We offer a SNAP match program, so we double SNAP recipients SNAP at the market only up to $10, sadly. Interestingly, that SNAP match program has tripled in size since the pandemic started, and that hasn't gone down. So essentially, Grow Food Northampton is looking at $70,000 in SNAP matching this year alone. For people who are on SNAP. We also have a SNAP Shares program where we offer free shares to SNAP recipients at the Anchor Farm on the Grow Food Northampton Community Farm, Crimson and Clover. So 7 months out of the year, they have a weekly share at Crimson and Clover Farm. And then the farmers markets, of course, as you know, provide direct access for vendors to community members to fresh local farm produce and products. Some photos of those. And I mentioned before, in the pandemic, we launched something that we hadn't done before. We did have a mobile market 7 months out of the year that sold vegetables in around different sites in the community, particularly at subsidized housing communities. And we sold those at a between 75 and 95% subsidized rate. But the the community food distribution project is actually completely no cost fruits and vegetables all year long, both through doorstep delivery and also through tables, so that people have more choice. People who want to come out and come to tables that we set up in. We do doorstep delivery to 15 locations, community housing projects, and we have 6 tables so that people from other parts of the city can come to choose what they want, and people from the housing communities can also come. We've purchased over 500,000 pounds of local produce and other farm products from 27 local farms. So during the pandemic, we were also supporting local farms that saw a lot of their markets closing. So, a lot of them were selling to the colleges and the universities around here, to restaurants, to catering companies. And all of those places shut down, and the pandemic started right in March, and it was like getting right into the season, and they didn't have markets. So we immediately created this we had relationships with these farms, but we strengthened our relationships with these 27 farms to purchase from them on a regular basis to deliver to people who were experiencing food insecurity. These are photos from that. One of the things that became really clear to us very shortly after we launched the Community Food Distribution Project was that we really needed, a big tenet of Grow Food Northampton is this concept of shifting power to the people most affected. So we decided to create a food access advisory committee. We have 7 people right now. It's been as many as 12 people who meet on a weekly basis to help guide us in all of our food access programming. And it's been a really fruitful, mutually informative relationship. And we've done all kinds of cooking demonstrations and food tasting and things like that, and we always distribute recipes in English and Spanish with the food so that people know how to use it. One of the critiques that we're constantly kind of trying to navigate is, we want things that are easy to prepare, that we know, that are culturally relevant, of course, that we like to eat, that our kids like to eat. So we're trying to do that as much as possible, and we're trying to provide kind of food education to people and to create common experiences for people with kind of outdoor food tasting events and things like that, to just introduce people to new and different things to eat, ways to prepare different things. So all of that is happening.
Question.
Yeah.
When you do your food demonstrations, are you at the places where the people need it most? What do I mean? For example, you got the housing authority. A lot of those people may not be able to go across town where you do the cooking demonstration where people can drive to. Do you do it at the site, or do you take several? You understand you can only do so much because manpower or people power.
Yeah.
Where do you do your cooking demonstrations?
Yeah, we do all of it at the subsidized housing communities. So everything that's one of the things that we've had to really develop is relationships with sometimes really intransigent, really difficult, like the Northampton Housing Authority or the private companies that hold some of the subsidized housing communities in the community. We have to build trust with them in order to be able to get into the community. And also they assist us to a large degree. They have different means of communicating with tenants that in the beginning we didn't have, and so we would use their systems. So it's this constant dance of trying to develop a relationship with them so we can do things like do cooking demonstrations on the green in front of the houses in a particular community. But that's the whole idea behind it. We do try, and we just got a grant actually to do things at our farmers markets, and we're trying to figure out transportation now to see if we can figure out ways to pull people so they come to the farmers market and they become more comfortable with coming to the market, and also we'll do different food kinds of activities at the farmers market. And that's actually starting in the winter. We just got the money for the winter, so we're trying to figure out if we're going to be able to do it with COVID restrictions or if we'll have to wait till the spring. Yeah, this stuff is all logistically incredibly complex, actually. So it's, I'm telling you these tiny snapshots, but there's so much kind of delicate maneuvering and thinking that goes into every one of these projects. And we did this, 52 weeks out of the year, so people trudging through the snow, doing doorstep delivery and all of that. We also have a giving garden. It used to be much larger. We actually had to reduce it because of staffing issues, but we were growing about 9,000 pounds of fresh organic produce that we were giving to 5 different meal sites in Northampton and East Hampton. We had to reduce the space, and we're only growing this year, I think, about 3,000 pounds. But it's another piece of that, not primary prevention work that we do, where we're actually growing for different places that are feeding the community. One of the great things that we found it does for us, though, is it brings in volunteers and people. A lot of the community gardeners will volunteer hours, do volunteer hours to do the growing there. It's another venue for us to provide education to people who want to learn how to grow food and to be involved in helping to be engaged in the food system, the local food system. So this is our giving garden. This is some of the harvest from the giving garden. And then you can see Manna Community Kitchen is the main, for those of you who don't live in Northampton, the main meal site, communal meal site in Northampton. And we regularly bring them things about 6 months out of the year. And this is some of the meals that they've prepared with our tomatoes and greens and all of that. So you can actually see it kind of transform into the food that people are eating. And then the last piece of what we do, so I mentioned food access, land access, and community education. We provide education for kids and adults. We work very closely with the Northampton Public Schools to provide education in the schools, but we also do a lot of on-farm learning, real hands-on learning with kids and adults. And there's just a few of those photos. Time check again, please.
3:58.
Okay. So I want to end, this is my favorite picture of the community garden. It's just this beautiful misty morning picture. But I just want to say, I mean, all of you come from some kind of farming, gardening background, so you know what it's like to be out in the field, like early in the morning. But it's the most beautiful place I know. You know, whenever I want to kind of get centered or grounded or whatever, I just go to the community farm, and the earlier the better, because the beauty is just, I don't know, and it kind of oozes with hope, you know, like the place just feels good to be in. Aviva, you've been there, right? Didn't you have that feeling when you went there? Yeah. Anyway, I wanted to end with pulling out a little bit of what I mentioned at the beginning when we were talking about land justice, because we're talking here about kind of public health for people. And it feels really important to me to also have a component that talks about not just healing people and giving people access to what they need to grow and flourish, but the land as well. And that's why my organization and the people that we work with are all practitioners of organic and regenerative farming. Because like people, you know, the land and air and the soil is all interconnected, and water is all interconnected to humans as well. And we can't heal people without healing the earth. So the whole piece too, for me, about prioritizing people over profits, you know, we're dealing with big ag over here, that essentially industrial agriculture is ruining the planet, taking control of the food system, and essentially depleting. It's an extractive industry that is depleting not just people but the land, not just the land but the people that need food. And so it just feels like an important part of this equation to think about how we access our food, how we grow our food, is just as important as anything else. So I guess in the last, whatever, 20 minutes or something that we have, I wanted to kind of hear from you about, I don't know if I was able to kind of convey enough about kind of the public health approach for you to kind of pull out the places or the things that you saw Grow Food Northampton doing that are in fact kind of public health based, that are primary prevention, that are really thinking about food and land justice, and where you can see critiques of what's not being done. And anything else that you want to talk about, really, and if you have any questions, someplace that you would like us to go a little bit deeper in the conversation, I would love to do that. So I'm opening up the floor to all of you. Yeah.
I'm gonna sit with your first question about trying to pull out how it connects to public health. I'm still thinking about that. I do have a question, and I want to try and keep it as small as I can. What strikes me is just that as an 11-person organization, which is what you said you were, just like how connected your organization is to like disenfranchised farmers and community members who are seeking sort of land access. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to your like successes and challenges around connecting to those people and what outreach was like, and how you think about kind of sustainability in that relationship building.
Yeah, that's a perfect question. Thank you. So we're in Northampton. Northampton is 90% white. And the people that we serve are probably 50% people of color, because there is an incredibly disproportionate number of people in those subsidized housing communities, people of color. And our staff is right now is 100% white. Our board is not 100% white, but almost, our board of directors. And it's something that we struggle with. We are just starting a year-long process of a racial justice and anti-racism piece of work, an audit of our work in the community and of our organization, and racial justice learning sessions on a monthly basis with an outside consulting firm, because it is really clear to us that we have to do better. We have pretty long-standing relationships. We were doing these mobile markets at many different sites around the community for 6 years before the pandemic hit. So we had already developed, to a large extent, relationships in the different subsidized housing communities around Northampton. And what does that mean, relationships? You know, like a lot of people kind of knew about the subsidized vegetables that they could buy from us, they would come out. A lot of people didn't. So when I say relationships, you know, it's some people that were really engaged with the idea of getting fresh, healthy food, but that isn't everybody. And then we know that the reality of people's lives is that a lot of people are working 2 jobs, or some are single mothers and they can't leave their unit, their apartment, to come out, which is one of the reasons why we decided to do doorstep delivery during COVID, was for health and safety reasons, but also because so many people couldn't leave because their kids were home from school, because schools were closed and all of that. But with the years, we've always done different kinds of activities too, which are kind of, you know, community building activities. And that means building community with us too, this white organization. And it's part of the reason why we wanted to create this Food Access Advisory Committee. We also have 4 people that we employ that we call participant staffers. So they're people who live in a few of the different housing communities, who participate in our programming, but also do the deliveries with us and kind of act as liaisons back and forth to the organization and to the folks that we're serving. So we have the Food Access Advisory Committee and participant staffers as people who kind of are helping us brainstorm the programming that we're doing around with the food itself, but also this kind of value-added programming of different activities and events and things like that. in terms of the farms that we leased to, we did some really proactive for about 2 years before we created our new plan to have 10 farms on the community farm. We did a lot of kind of outreach and investigation and connecting with farmers in the Springfield area and to different refugee organizations, and just really did some real proactive outreach to try and bring in as diverse a group of farmers as we could. 4 out of the 10 farms that we have are owned and operated by people of color, or, and then on top of that, we have like a queer farm, and it self-identifies as queer, and that's kind of a big piece of how they do their work. So we really made a major effort to try and bring in as diverse a bunch of farmers, and to really look at people who were new farmers, have been harmed by the conventional food system. But it's hard because we're in Northampton and we're a white organization, and we are very aware of the shortcomings of both of those aspects of who we are and what we do. And where we are really. Yeah, in fact, I'll just add one more thing, which is that we've had people come to us and say, why are you working in Northampton? Northampton is pretty well resourced. Why aren't you working in Holyoke? Or why don't you work in Springfield? Or why aren't you working really closely with organizations in Holyoke and Springfield? And I don't know if people are geographically familiar enough but those are kind of the poorer areas and the areas with people of color, the adjacent cities. And we've struggled with that, and we have really asked, are we doing the right thing for our community? Is it enough that we're serving the Northampton community and doing outreach to the people who are in need in our community? Should we be partnering more with organizations in adjacent cities that are much poorer and populated by people of color? And it's resource limitation to a large degree, and it is important that even a town like Northampton, a city like Northampton, had resources to develop a just local food system. So it's an ongoing conversation that we have as an organization. That was a really long answer to your question. That was just it's a complex bunch of stuff to talk about. Yeah. Oh.
If someone has a question in the chat.
Oh, okay. Nothing in the chat? Okay.
There's nothing in the chat at the moment.
Okay.
Do you, I understand what you just said, but do you have a relationship with similar-minded organizations in Springfield and Holyoke to even share ideas and to even amplify each other's work,
Yeah.
You have some kind of coalition in that way.
We have just in the last 3 years started we do something called Valley Bros Day, which is a joint fundraising day of 10 different food justice organizations from Franklin County down to Hamden County, which is where Springfield and Holyoke are. And we've been partnering with them on fundraising. But we just this year started talking about, now that the pandemic's kind of winding down or something like that, we've talked about meeting on a regular basis to figure out how we can support each other's work.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to like the differences between working with communities versus like in schools, and that's specific to like community education. Like when you open things up community-wide to the public versus like directly with the schools, or to like pros and cons of both.
Yeah, I mean, again, resource struggle. We had historically worked almost exclusively in the public schools. We have a program called Grow Food Kids, where we went into all of the K through 3 classes 5 times a year and did different lessons in cooking things with them, and talked about the cultural origins of foods and things like that. just kind of organically in the community garden, there was a lot of kind of workshopping. So different community gardeners would offer different classes and courses. But when the pandemic happened and we couldn't go into the schools, we really stepped up the community education piece, and it also dovetailed with the community education pieces that we were doing together with the Community Food Distribution Project and the subsidized housing communities. So we've actually grown in that regard of doing community-wide education and a lot of stuff on the community farm and less in the schools. And in September, we're planning to ramp up the work in the schools again if we're able to get back into the schools. Does that answer what you were trying to get at?
Yeah, it does. It sounds like you kind of started with this focus on the schools, and that naturally, as well as like the pandemic influence, led to doing more community-wide. I'm curious, have you ever done anything that like sent meals home with kids through the school system?
No, but we work really closely with the food services system in the Northampton Public Schools. And in fact, we were donating a massive amount of vegetables to them during the pandemic because they were doing, school meals. And we have a farm to school program, and we were funded to do farm to school work. So we have a real relationship with the food services system, but we don't, in the summer, they're getting meals at home, but we haven't been involved in that other than through the pandemic when we were donating vegetables to them to supplement the meals and to make sure that they were getting fresh local vegetables in their meals.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
My question is about the 10 different farms that you have at the community farm, and to what extent are there aspects of the farm that kind of work as a commons, as their shared resources or equipment that those farms collaborate with? And then second part of the question is how the revenue generation is for the organization. Does it, to what extent that comes from farmers paying leaseholds or fundraising, and what that balance is?
Those are great questions. So the whole concept behind the community farm is that there are shared resources, tools, education amongst the different farms. So they share coolers that we provide, water pumps from the river for one of our parcels where there isn't access to infrastructure for water. Shared outhouses, we have composting outhouses, for instance. And then there's kind of this natural generation of skill sharing amongst the farmers, tractor sharing. We had a situation with the Somali Bantu farmers that they really wanted to till their land, to do an initial till. That's the kind of farming that they knew how to do. And we didn't have the resources to provide it, but one of the two bigger farms tilled their land for them. So there is very much that kind of mutual sharing. And the organization tends to all of the parcel edges and just makes sure that things are in order for the farmers. We also just got solar for the whole farm and electricity for the farms that are in the further outreaches. So things of that nature happen as well. In terms of the generation of funding, we make almost no money from leasing to the farms because we do this sliding fee, no cost to low cost fees. We have two farms that are large and successful, and they pay below market rate, but closer to market rate for the acreage that they lease. But more than half our farmers have no cost leases. By law, we have to take $1 from them, and I'm not quite sure what that is legally, but it creates some kind of contractual relationship, but they have $1 leases essentially.
Alisa, could I add some questions to that? Someone in the chat had posted about the lease model. And if you could tell us a little bit more, expand on what you were saying about determining the length of the lease and how do you secure long-term tenure for farms? Also a question around, are you hosting incubator farms or will they be permanent farms on the land?
Yeah, those are all good questions, and I have to see if I can get to all of them. Let me just finish talking about the resources of the organization. It's almost 100% individual donors and institutional donors, so we're constantly writing grants to fund everything that we do, constantly doing fundraising, all the things that a nonprofit does. So we're not making a lot of money from our lease fees or our community gardener fees or our vendor fees at the farmers markets. It's a very marginal piece of the income of the organization. In terms of the tenure, we are responsive. We offer long-term leases, but we work very individually with each of the farms to define and determine what they need and want. We had not historically leased to incubator farms. We wanted to kind of really foster those long-term lease situations. But this year we actually have 2 incubator farms. One is Andrea, who's not here anymore, but she has a small, very small parcel, and she is a first-year farmer, and she's not quite sure where she wants to go with it, but that's an incubator farm. And Flowerwork Farm, the other farm that I mentioned before, that is our smallest farm, is also an incubator farm, and they don't know how long they'll be on the land. We have one farm that has, our anchor farm has a 99-year lease. We have 10-year leases, we have 6-year leases, so it differs, and it's all based on what the particular farm wants from us.
That's very helpful, thank you. And an added question to funding. So in terms of the educational opportunities that you provide within the community, are those at free or low cost?
Everything that we do in the public schools is free, of course, and that's very intentional because we want to make sure that we're, being as democratic as possible at hitting, every age group, every kid in the public school system. Occasionally, for particular courses, we have charged kind of nominal fees of $5 or $10 just to ensure that people actually show up when they sign up. But everything that we do is free. It really is all subsidized or paid for by the fundraising that we do as an organization.
Thank you.
Anything else? Yeah.
2 questions. One, the folks in the housing project communities that you're primarily serving, how many of them are able to take advantage to come and actually work, and be in the community garden, not just receive the food or be part of the whole, from all of it, to feel like they're part of it. I know time, in terms of resources, time, right, time, dump time, and maybe that requires, childcare, all the things, as you said, everything has a million pieces. And also, how did you acquire the land, and is the land owned by the nonprofit and then leased, which I always imagined it was, but I don't want to assume that.
Yeah. Those are good questions. You guys are good. You're getting all the kind of meaty questions. So the first question, just in the last year, since kind of things have chilled out a little bit around the pandemic, we created, as part of the community food distribution program, and this came directly from the Food Access Advisory Committee. We started we're doing all kinds of things in the community garden. In fact, there's a senior plot. So people who live in senior housing that we've been working with for a while, and we provide transportation. We bring them to the farm once or twice a week, and they're tending to a plot, and they're doing different kinds of community service projects in the community garden, so that there's much more of that kind of reciprocity or something like that between the people who are receiving food through the community food distribution project, and also that educational piece of, this is the community garden. We also just launched a project to create more community gardens on housing project properties. So that's happening. But again, all of this stuff it requires staff time, it requires money, it's a lot. But we this year just started those projects to create more of that integrated sense. It's not just people receiving food, it's people who want to be gardening too. A big problem that we have is that we're in Florence, which isn't like right in the heart of Northampton, and we don't have good bus service to the community garden. And so transportation is like the biggest challenge for people who don't have their own transportation to get into the community garden. And we're just starting to think about like lobbying the, whatever it's called, and what's it called? The
PBTA.
PBTA, thank you. Because we have to resolve that, or we're never gonna have that like back and forth. But people are super excited about the gardens that we're creating with them in 6 different housing authority properties on 6. And then your other question was, about how we came to buy the land. So this is a really cool story. About 13 years ago, the very last agricultural parcels in Northampton that were like working farms were up for sale, and there was a developer on tap to purchase them to build like mini mansions. It was 2 contiguous farms that were owned by a brother and a brother-in-law, that were farmed by a brother and brother-in-law. And the community, a particular person, I don't know if anyone knows, Lily Lombard is this amazing community force. She was like, this can't happen, and this is our last prime soil in the city, and it's right in the heart of downtown Florence. And she mobilized the community in an incredible way, raised over $800,000 for a down payment for this land, created a whole relationship with the city, which has come back to bite us in the butt, but that's a whole other story. That we purchased it all, and then we leased part of it to them, leased to buy so that they could create playing fields, which is kind of a disaster. We got them to manage them organically, but we haven't been able to really rely on that happening. And so we have these playing fields that are adjacent to our community farm parcels that it's disruptive. It's like a lot of traffic. It's a lot of problematic stuff. But we had to do it in order to make it happen. We got a permanent agricultural restriction on all of the parcels, all within a matter of a year, and all with incredible community support. But that's been part of the challenge. I started at Grow Food Northampton just under 3 years ago. We're trying to kind of re-engage that level of support. And the pandemic kind of did that, but again, people are very weird and fickle, and Yep. So that's how we came to own the land.
Robert has another question.
Yeah, I went away. What did it say?
There's a the question was, is the land enrolled in APR, which I think I heard you say you accomplished that in the first year. And then if so, have you come up against any challenges enacting your mission when MDAR's regulations of APR land are so focused on commercial viability?
Yes, that's a really smart question.
Yeah,
very incisive question.
APR is agricultural protected.
No, it's agricultural conservation property. What does that actually stand for?
Agricultural protection restriction.
Restriction. Yeah, so it is really restrictive, and actually it's we've had problems because we're actually right now about to launch a capital campaign because we want to build a barn that has like educational space in it. But we're going to have to like wrangle with MDAR, the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources, because technically we're not supposed to build an educational facility on the farm because it's only supposed to be for farmer use. And we're trying to make a case for the fact that this is all like integrated, and it's so important that we also are able to educate people and provide that resource to the community. And so that's one example of how we're wrangling with MDAR and how the APR has restricted us. We also wanted to install solar. Here's another example. Last year, 2 years ago, and you're not allowed to build any structure that isn't directly for farm use. We had to create a pavilion essentially to put the solar panels on, and we had to work for like over a year to convince them that we wanted to put up a pavilion where we could do some education, but we didn't frame it that way. So we actually had a structure on which to put the solar. So yes, everything is harder than it should be because we have that APR, but it's also important to have the APR, so it's complicated.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robert.
They're laughing at your little pop-up thanks. Anything else? We didn't really get at the whole, like, you know, primary prevention, what we're doing, that kind of thing, but these questions that you're asking are so spot on and perfect, so thank you. Does anybody know of other places or organizations that are doing kinds of similar kinds of work, or? No? You had a question?
Anyway.
Oh, okay.
Do you know of other
Seeds
places?
of Solidarity in Orange.
Yeah, we
Deb and
work a
Rick.
lot with them. Deb is
Yeah.
great. They do kind of like education, farming hand in hand. They also do they grow food for people who are experiencing food insecurity. It's a great little organization in Orange.
Yeah, there's a group in Springfield called Gardening Community. They actually
Gardening
hire
Community?
youth.
Yeah.
And you just know it when they actually have a little stand. It's open 4 or 5 days a week or something like that.
Yep.
Does
And
on Walnut Street, yeah.
also? Nuestras Raíces
Yeah, in fact, Nuestra Raíces, which is the farming arm of the Pioneer Valley Workers Center, has land that kind of skirts the Hatfield, Northampton border. And we actually leased land to them last year because they wanted to expand. There was a little offshoot of people that they've been having a lot of problems with the town of Hatfield and with a lot of, it's all immigrant farmers from Central America. And they were targeted with pretty crappy racism. And so they didn't want to farm there anymore, some of the folks. And so they farmed with us, but they found that it was too hard to kind of manage the two separate parcels. So they're back in Hatfield and they didn't continue. They were with us for 2 years and they decided to move back to Hatfield.
We've got to do more door-to-door community, to like just people making those bridges, you know, with the community that you're in, and there's so much anonymity and there's so much not knowing each other, and it's resources, as you say, you know, just needing people to do that. We have a million ideas, but who's going to do it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we can wrap up if people are done. Yes, any questions? Thank you very much.